The room held its breath. Paper sighed under the judge's thumb, the air conditioner hissed like surf, and the wall clock ticked. Judge Marianne Holloway stopped reading. Her eyes hardened, her jaw squared, and the word left her mouth like a crack of a rifle. "This is criminal. Lock it down." Metal met metal as the bailiff slid the deadbolt. Murmurs died. My brother Caleb's practiced smile slid off his face. My mother's fingers found her pearls and clung there. I didn't look at either of them. I looked at the tan folder on the edge of the bench, the one I'd carried like a quiet promise. I inhaled once steady. 20 years had taught me how. We had come for something tidy and bloodless. Probate. The courtroom smelled of old books and lemon cleaner. The seal of the Commonwealth gleamed above the bench. "Parties are present," the clerk intoned. "Hart Estate Docket 57, Judge Holloway presiding." I sat at the petitioner's table in a navy dress that fit like armor. No ribbons, no brass. Just a pen, a legal pad, and the folder. My lawyer, Ava Klein, had the kind of poise that makes people lower their voices. "Breathe on fours, Colonel," she whispered. My pulse was steady the way it gets on helicopters when the ground is only a theory. Across from us, Caleb wore a suit too glossy for mourning. He had our father's height. Beside him, our mother Ruth sat straight-backed perfume like lilies on a grave. Jonah, my youngest brother, took the end chair like a man taking a pew. The will was simple. The business to Caleb, a trust to Jonah. The Bay House to me. Heron House. Even thinking the name moved a tide under my ribs. When the boilerplate ended, the judge asked any objections as to the validity of the instrument. Caleb stood before his lawyer could. He looked to the gallery auditioning. "Your Honor," he said, letting vowels linger, "we contest on grounds of undue influence and fraud." He turned at last, smiling the way men smile at mirrors. "She's got no rights, she's just a fake veteran." The sentence landed like thrown glass. A throat gasped. A pen stopped. I did nothing. I had practiced doing nothing. Ava rose like grammar, precise, inevitable. "Your Honor, we will answer that on the record. Before the mud spreads, may the court review one additional page pertinent to the instrument, the last page." "Benton Hale." Caleb's counsel chuckled into his cufflinks. "Last page theatrics. We've all seen the movie." The judge lifted a hand. "Bring it." I carried the folder to the bench. "Skin to Manila, Manila to Oak. Chain of custody," the judge asked. "Logged." Ava answered, tapping the receipt tab. Time-stamped, notarized, sealed before service. The judge flipped once, twice. I watched her eyes, not her fingers. Eyes tell you when the road disappears. Ruth's perfume sweetened into panic. Jonah's knee began to bounce. Caleb kept smiling for the gallery, casting for belief. Colonel Hart Benton tried, "Didn't you once claim a deployment date that—" Ava lifted a finger. "Counsel will wait." Judge Holloway stopped on the last page. The room tightened around the moment like a stitch drawn closed. She spoke the words I will never forget, and the bailiffs moved, door bolt click. The clerk slid plastic sleeves toward the bench for evidence handling. On the record, the judge said, there is potential forgery of a testamentary instrument, suspected misuse of veteran designations, and possible diversion of charitable funds. No one leaves. Counsel approach. Ruth's pearls clicked against her teeth. Caleb's fingers finally went still. Jonah folded his hands and stared at his knuckles like they belonged to someone braver. Ava leaned into me, words barely air. "We're going to be fine." "I know," I said. What I didn't say, I was holding two wars in my chest, the one I'd trained for and the one no training covers. There are firefights and there are family fights. One teaches you cover. The other teaches you how little there is. Colonel Hart, the judge, said, eyes still on the page, "You will remain available." "Yes, Your Honor." Benton tried to stand. "Objection." Ava didn't look at him. "Sit." The gallery went paper thin. I could hear breaths, the scratch of wool on a pew, a cough swallowed like a secret. The bailiffs settled into their stances, choosing to be walls. I looked at the folder's edge, the clean square of it, and thought of a ledger. My father's last, careful loops, his hand steady until the very end of a sentence. I thought of a nurse's affidavit under blue tape. I thought of a wire transfer that curved through 3 countries and tried to come home clean. Mostly, I thought of a porch light that never learned how to be anything but patient. Judge Holloway looked up. "We'll recess for 15, she said, and then nobody moves. A sound went through the room that wasn't sound at all, people realizing there was no hallway long enough to walk this off. I sat. The chair creaked in answer. "Breathe on 4s, Ava whispered again. I did. In 4. Hold 4. Out 4. Hold 4. The box a soldier draws in the air when there's no map and you need one anyway. Caleb found my eyes at last. He mouthed something that might have been a prayer or an insult. I returned nothing. My hands stayed folded the way my father folded his when he listened to weather coming in off the bay. I had not come to win a scene. I had come to end a lie. The door sighed shut. The lock clicked. The courtroom felt smaller and truer, like a ship battened for weather. We were going to see now, all of us. Some of us would learn which way was up. I put my palm flat on the table. Wood, grain, warmth, ordinary things that outlast storms. "Counsel," the judge called. "Approach." Ava stood. I stood with her. We walked to the bench together, our footsteps soft as respect. The first time I understood what it meant to keep something I was 10 and barefoot on the back steps of Heron House. The planks were warm and splintery. The bay smelled like metal and salt. Beyond the reeds, the water dulled like a tarnished coin. My father sat beside me, coffee cooling on the rail, a pencil behind his ear, his ledger open to a page headed Fuel. He wasn't sentimental, but he loved what lasted. "Some things you guard, Eve," he said, tapping the margin. "Or they're gone when you need them." He didn't lecture. He gave pictures. The porch light burning late, the skiff tied before a storm. My mother Ruth careful with china and gossip and how a girl held her back straight at supper. We kept different things in our house. Ruth kept appearances. My father kept promises. Heron House wasn't grand. White clapboard, paint flaking in curls, a roof browned by July. In August, the cicadas made the screens vibrate. In January, the windows breathed and settled with a sigh. The house knew our footsteps. Pencil marks climbed the pantry door. A crescent nick on the stair remembered the day Caleb dropped a toolbox. A black ring on the counter scolded us about hot skillets forever. Caleb learned early how to be looked at. He whistled in the marina yard and men turned. He had father's height and none of his patience. If asked for directions, he pointed like a mayor. Jonah was different, quiet, not weak. He loved small jobs that mattered later. Splicing line, polishing cleats, checking fuel caps for grit. I left for the army with a duffel and a face weathered by salt. At the bus station, my father hugged me. Once, then leveled my shoulders. "Keep your head and keep your word." Ruth dabbed at dry eyes. Caleb said the country would make me famous. Jonah pressed a pocket knife into my palm. War has a smell nobody writes down. Hot radios, CLP oil canvas dust, the way a Humvee seat bakes your back. On the first flight in country, I gripped the webbing and counted 4s the way I do now in courtrooms. Rotor wash lifted the desert in sheets. I learned to mark grid on a shaking map, to sleep 20 minutes and wake already moving, to take orders from a voice I couldn't see and give orders to people who could see me too well. Some people keep medals. I kept lists, radio checks, serial numbers, convoy timings, the names of kids in the villages and the names of the people at my shoulder. When we folded flags, I kept my thumbs even and the triangles sharp because it mattered. When I wrote home, I left out the blast that drove gravel into my sleeve and left a constellation in my shoulder. I wrote about an old woman's tea that tasted like hay and forgiveness. I came back older and cleaner inside. The world throws grit until you either polish or grind down to nothing. I chose polish. The uniform came off like a skin I could reach for. The habits stayed count. What matters, keep what matters. When our father died, it happened the way he would have chosen after supper porch light, on the radio murmuring weather 3 counties over. We buried him from the little Methodist church. We put him under a pine that perfumed the air when the sun warmed it. The will was as straight as he'd been. Caleb got the business, the marinas, and the real estate arm. Jonah got a trust. I got Heron House. The ledger stayed with the house the way a keel stays with a boat. For a time, we behaved like people who remembered how. Caleb bragged without malice and ordered new signage. Ruth walked the rooms, measuring curtains with her eyes pressing her fingers into window sashes as if testing whether the house knew her name or mine. Jonah brought jars of screws sorted by thread and size, the kind of love a quiet man offers. I fixed small things. A loose porch post, a wobbling fan. I scrubbed salt bloom off sills and scrubbed something else out of myself, the feeling of being judged by people who did not know what a night can cost. In the afternoons, I made coffee the way my father did and counted ospreys on the channel markers. Then the envelope came, heavyweight paper that made the mailbox feel ceremonial. I slit it with Jonah's knife and spread the contents on the kitchen table. Complaint, summons, attachments. Words assembled like law and aimed like a finger. They accused me of forging records, of pretending to be what I am, of bending a dying man's will with a uniform I hadn't earned. I stood under the kitchen light and read every line twice. The refrigerator hummed, the tide knocked, the house listened. I didn't throw anything. The old me might have. Instead, I made a list. Names to call, records to pull, things to leave alone. I phoned the attorney who used to file father's boat liens and asked for a referral. That's how I met Ava Klein, voice like clear glass mind, like a well-cared-for engine. She didn't promise victory, she promised work. First we verify what's ours, she said. Then we verify what's theirs. Then we watch who fidgets. I called the record center. I requested copies I already owned because another copy is another witness. I found my DD 214 commendations, I never framed evaluations written in tents that rattled in the wind. I opened my father's ledger and flipped to the back to where the pencil softened and loops grew larger. Tired writing, careful still. Tucked beneath the cover flap was a note I had never seen, the paper the color of tea, the graphite pressed hard enough to ghost through. I set the note beside the complaint and felt the old house change its breathing. It's just air and lungs and boards, I know. But I also knew this some things you guard no matter the cost. Near midnight, I turned off the porch light and went to bed, with the papers stacked on the chair by the door the way soldiers stack their gear when they intend to move at first light. The smear started small, like mildew on a bathroom tile. You tell yourself you'll scrub tomorrow. A single headline above the fold in the county paper, decorated vet or family fraud. The photo they used was from a potluck the Methodist ladies threw when I came home after my third tour, paper plate potato salad, a plastic flag stuck into a cupcake. Underneath, the columnist worked in questions like Burr's irregularities alleged, some say. No one said their names. That's the trick with doubt. It doesn't need a signature. At the cafe on Water Street, the barista stopped writing Eve on my cup and switched to May AM. The bell over the door chimed and people glanced up just to look away. A man at the corner table talked too loudly into his phone. Yeah, it's a mess. Stolen valor. Can you imagine? He wanted me to hear. I stirred my coffee until the swirl calmed. Ava sent a text. Don't chase smoke. Build the file. I put my cup down, went home, and turned my kitchen into a dull little factory. Printer warming clicks. Paper tray hum. 3-hole punch confettiing the floor like a party no one wanted to attend. I made an intake sheet for myself. What I know versus what I can prove. The first list ran hot. The second cold. The discipline felt familiar. It steadied me to watch piles grow in straight lines. The emails started next. The Veterans Association, cordial clerical, requested clarifications on entries that never needed clarifying. Dates, duty stations, an evaluation report that someone had conveniently mislaid. I pulled copies. I requested new ones anyway. A second witness, even when it says the same thing, is still a second witness. Chain of custody, I said aloud, writing the time and my initials in the margin. The house listened without comment. Sunday. At church, Mrs. Whitlow hugged me and pressed a mint into my hand the way she did when I was 9, and fidgety. You know how tongues wag, she whispered, breath like spearmint and kindness. In the next pew, A man I didn't know cleared his throat 3 times and stared at the hymn board like it had answers. After service, the men in the vestibule spoke in parenthesis around me. Shame if true, course we don't know. Paperwork's the Lord these days. I shook hands, looked people in the eye and refused to offer them the small performance of defensiveness they came to see. 2 days later, the blog posts hit slicker, better lit. An expert in metals posted a grainy image from my first homecoming and circled a bar with a red oval. Placement wrong, he wrote. It wasn't. The photo was mirrored. The comments bloomed fast and feral under his post. She wants attention. She's crazy. Her poor mother. I closed the tab, not because I couldn't stand it, but because I could. Ava's voice again. Don't chase smoke. Build the file. Caleb's lawyer, Benton Hale, has good suits and better hair. He went on AM radio to talk about deep concern for legal integrity. He emphasized integrity until the word lost its meaning. If the colonel has nothing to hide, he said she'll have nothing to fear. That's a line men like to use when they're holding a match behind their back. The first forged item arrived couriered in a blue folder, like it had paid for the privilege. A letter, allegedly, from my old battalion S1 raising questions about my deployment dates. The signature was almost right. His J looped the way it always did, but the pressure was wrong. Whoever faked it forgot that he signed with a felt tip on carbon forms most days. His line weight never wavered. I laid the real one beside it and took a photo. Same name, 2 hands. I logged it, copied it, sealed it. Ava replied within minutes. Document examiner already booked. Keep originals flat. Ruth went on Channel 6, seated beside Caleb, her hair framed like a crown. As a mother she began, and the host tilted toward her. She was careful with her verbs. We've wondered, we worry, we pray. When the camera cut to Caleb, he took a breath like a stage cue. If there's nothing wrong, we'll be the first to apologize, he said, and smiled privately at the lens. Jonah wasn't on screen. If you looked hard behind Caleb's shoulder, you could see a sliver of him in the green room elbows, tucked head low. A glimpse is not a witness, but my heart filed it anyway. Calls came at dinner time. Reporters. A man from a podcast called Honor Watch. A woman wanting to amplify my truth. I let the machine take them. The house phone is old enough that you can hear the click when someone gives up. It's a satisfying sound, like a door you didn't have to get up to close. At the grocery, a child asked his mother, "Is she a soldier?" The woman shushed him and pushed the cart as if proximity could smudge a boy. I bought canned tomatoes and a bag of sugar and went home through streets I know in my bones. At a stoplight, a pickup idled next to me. The driver rolled down his window and gave me a thumbs up, then quickly looked away like the gesture had embarrassed him. Small kindnesses count as proof too. Not in court, but in a person. Ava and I met twice a week in her office that smelled faintly of lemon and cartridge ink. We built the spine of the case, DD-214, awards orders, deployment rosters, sworn statements, FOIA receipts, the notarizations on father's codicil, hospice logs, bank statements for the veterans charity Ruth bragged about at galas. Marta, the forensic accountant, ran her finger down columns the way some people pet dogs. Money talks like a liar, she said. It tells you pieces that fit if you stop asking for a story. Nights were the hardest. Not fear noise. A brain wants to narrate at 2 a.m. I made tea. I sorted screws Jonah had brought me by thread and size. I walked the house and touched the places it had cataloged our lives, the stair nick from Caleb's toolbox, the pantry marks where our heights had leaned forward year after year. I stood on the porch until the bay air salted my tongue, and the world went from black to iron gray to the light that doesn't announce itself so much as appear. Yes, I cried once. Not because of what they said, but because of what they took without asking the quiet between me and a place I loved. I cried, and then I wrote down what time it was and what page I was on, because documentation is how I know I am still me. The last straw was not the loud thing. Loud things you can brace for. It was a quiet letter from a foundation that had funded a veterans job training program I spoke at 2 summers ago. Until your status is fully clarified, they wrote, we'll suspend distribution of your recorded session. Whoever drafted it believed themselves neutral, even gentle. I set it beneath the forged S1 letter and stared at the pair. Falsity on one side. Caution, which functions like falsity on the other. That's enough, I told the counter to sink the window. Not to be dramatic, to set the cadence of the next steps. I drove to Ava's with the tan folder, the complaint, the letters, the copies, the receipts, and the tea-colored note from beneath Father's ledger flap. I didn't tell her what it said. I just slid it into the sleeve and signed the chain of custody log in her presence. Her pen clicked like a latch. We proceed, she said. What do you need from me? I asked. Breathing, she said, and patience. The rest I can subpoena. I went home by the long road along the marsh, where egrets stand like folded handkerchiefs. The bay breathed out and in. I counted fours at the stop sign. In 4, hold 4, out 4, hold 4. I didn't pray exactly. I just said my father's sentence the way some people say the Lord's Prayer. Some things you guard or they're gone when you need them. When I got to the porch, the light I'd left on made a circle on the boards. I stepped into it. The night was loud with insects. In the dark glass of the kitchen window, my face looked older and exactly right. The folder lay on the table like a thing that had agreed to carry me if I carried it back. Jonah asked me to meet him where the wind could carry the words away. The bait shop was dark. Sodium lights threw orange coins across the bay. Halyards ticked against masts. The pier boards flexed and sang. The air tasted of salt and old rope. He stood with his hands jammed into his jacket pockets, shoulders a little rounded. Thanks for coming, he said. You picked the right place, I told him. Caleb doesn't like places where he can't be seen. We took the far bench. The channel markers blinked red-green. Somewhere, a radio mumbled a ball game. Mom's worried, he said. About me. About how she'll look. He tried for kinder and couldn't find it. What is this, Jonah? He took one hand from his pocket and set a small black thumb drive between us. Then he slid out a ledger, the green cloth kind our father used, corners worn, binding tired. Where did you get that? I asked. The marina office. False, back in the bottom drawer. Brass screws you turn with a quarter. He exhaled. Dad hid it. I set the ledger on my lap without opening it. I didn't touch the drive. Chain of custody starts with your hands. I'm not bringing this because I picked a side, he said. I'm bringing it because I can't watch this anymore. What's on it? Emails, spreadsheets, 2 press drafts Benton wrote months ago. Minutes with a notary, a Veterans Initiative budget that pays for parties and consulting. Money ends in an account Mom can touch. He swallowed. A note about coaching the hospice nurse. The halyards kept ticking. How long have you had this? 3 months. I hoped it would stop. Then I told myself I was wrong. Then I wasn't. Why now? He stared at the marsh, a darker line against the dark. Because you're the only one who ever stood in front of the fire for me. When the house crackled, you took the noise. I can't keep being quiet if quiet means letting this happen to you. I'm not asking you to testify, I said. I know. He smiled without joy. I'm not promising I will. I'm telling you I know what I know. I took a receipt book from my bag and wrote the date, time, and place. I described the thumb drive, black, unbranded, scuffed, and the ledger, green cloth bound with a coffee ring on page 1. I signed. Then I looked at my brother, who had our father's ears, our mother's mouth, and a shame that belonged to neither. If you're afraid, say it now, I said. You get this one mercy. I'm afraid, he said. Not of you, of what Caleb will do and of what Mom will become to survive it. Okay, I said. Now say the other thing. What other thing? That you're doing it anyway? He nodded like a soldier receiving an order he didn't have to like. I'm doing it anyway. I slid the drive into an anti-static sleeve and sealed it. I wrapped the ledger in butcher paper and wrote across the fold. I photographed both with the old digital camera that never touches the internet. Then I called Ava on speaker. Tell me you're home, she said. Pier, I said. Evidence from Jonah. Emails, drafts, budget lines, Ledger Volume 2. I'll bring it tonight. Do not plug that drive into anything you own, she said. Bring it sealed. I'll image it offline. We log chain of custody now. Jonah leaned toward the phone. I'm not on your side, he said to the air. I'm on the side of what's right. I can work with that, Ava said. Mr. Hart, thank you. When I hung up, I opened the ledger. Fuel parts slip. Fees, wages, my father's tidy pencil columns like fence rails. At the back, where his lines softened from tiredness, were two names that should not have met a date that undercut Benton's story. And a margin note I felt before I understood the last page wasn't about money. It was about intent. Did you read it? I asked. Not all, he said. I didn't know if I should. It's not a secret from you, I said. It's a secret from people who use secrets like tools. Caleb says transparency is for people who haven't built anything. Dad said sunlight is free. We let the wind work. A net hissed. Footsteps crossed behind us. I'll take this to Ava, I said. We won't go to the press. You won't? No. We go to the lab. To people who put their names under what they say. We don't feed the part of this that wants a crowd. You think they'll stop. I think loud is what people do when the math is wrong, I said. And I think truth doesn't quit. He nodded as if the numbers came out even. Eve, I'm sorry. I know, I said. Me too. We stood. He hugged me the way men do when grief and relief stand too close, a thump on the back to cover the tenderness. I walked the boards with the bundle under my arm. The halyards counted me off like a metronome. At the end of the pier, I looked back. Jonah stood with his hands in his pockets, staring at the seam where bay met sky. I drove the marsh road home. The tide breathed out. I counted fours. On the porch, the circle of light waited. I set the bundle on the table. The house did what kept houses do it held. I labeled the bags. I wrote, "Do not scan" on a note and pressed it to the drive case. I poured a glass of water and drank it like medicine. Then I listened to the refrigerator's hum, to a car door far away, to the small elastic sound of a house settling into night. Out beyond the dark window, a bell buoy tolled. I answered it under my breath, the sound you make when you've chosen your road, and all that's left is to walk it. Tomorrow, I told the Ledger, we proceed. Ava's office at night felt like a watch floor, quiet lit from below, instruments waiting. She met me with a clear tote nitrile gloves and a chain of custody form. Not a word to the building, she said. We're a CPA after hours. We logged the drive date time condition. My name? Her name Jonah's. A witness line left for Marta. I signed and didn't touch the pen cap to my lip. Ava slit the sleeve, tipped the drive onto a glass dish like a specimen, and rolled it into a closet where a fans-only tower waited. No network cards. No Wi-Fi. She powered it. The fan hummed. Imaging only, she said. Read only mount. We copy hash again. If the numbers match, the copy's faithful. I breathed on fours and watched the checksum crawl. When the hashes matched, she slid the duplicate to a second drive. Now we can look, she said. Marta Singh arrived in a dark cardigan with a pencil through her bun. She signed the witness line and leaned over the monitor with the small please sound only people who love spreadsheets make. Money talks like a liar, she murmured. It says true things, just not the ones you asked. We walked the ledgers on screen. Veterans, Initiative Event Services. Marta read. Invoices from a front company resolved to a mailbox store. Payments routed through a donor-advised fund. Fees landing in an account in Ruth's name, labeled household contingency. They didn't even stagger the amounts, Marta said. Round numbers are vanity. She printed a transaction map, a forest of arrows. Will the court hear all this, I asked. If it's authenticated, Ava said. We won't feed them a feast. We'll serve one plate at a time. Last page first, Marta said, smiling, but only when it's dessert. The document examiner came at 9. Dr. Lyle Moritz' narrow face, round glasses hands that never smudged ink. He wore a tie printed with magnified pen strokes. You brought me something good. Ava pointed to the forged S1 letter and the genuine one I'd kept plus hospice logs and my father's ledger. Moritz leaned into the microscope and whistled. Your forger learned the signature, but not the path, he said. Line quality breaks where a real hand flows. Felt tip pressure is wrong. We scanned the last page of the ledger at high resolution. Moritz toggled channels infrared ultraviolet. Pencil strokes fattened and thinned in a way that looked like truth. Same hand as the front, he said. Fatigue? Yes. Fraud? No. Colonel Retty. James Reed from JAG came after lunch, steam still on his coat from a sudden rain. He shook my hand like a colleague and carried the rules in his posture. You don't win with thunder, he said. You win with sequence. Ava briefed him while Marta and Moritz synchronized their tabs. Reed read the codicil, the notarization block, the hospice affidavit. Shelley Tran, he said, tapping the notary seal. She keeps a real book. Ava dialed Shelley. The speaker clicked, and a woman's voice came clean as a bell. Notary journal? She said after Ava introduced herself. Date ID type thumbprint fee. Wet signatures only. Remote notarization isn't valid for wills in our state. Pages turned. Yes. Mr. Hart executed a codicil 2 weeks before he passed. 2 witnesses present. I recorded their driver's licenses. The signature matches prior samples in my book. A pause. If someone filed another version, it didn't come from me. Reed nodded. That's good law, he said. Chain holds. We built binders, tabbed, color-coded, boring in the best way. Exhibit A, DD 214 and orders. Exhibit B, awards and evaluations. Exhibit C, hospice logs and Shelley's journal copies. Exhibit D, Marta's transaction map. Exhibit E, Moritz's report on line quality watermark paper stock. Exhibit L, the ledger's last page, and father's margin note sealed separately. What does the note actually say? Marta asked me privately over bad coffee. I watched rain streak the window. It says the thing you think it says, I answered. It says who asked for what. It says when. Then we don't lead with it, Ava said from the doorway. We build the ladder and let the last rung place itself. Caleb's side will go first, Reed said. They'll bring clean copies and confident men. Let them. If they think the floor is level, they'll dance. We'll measure the slope. He set his finger on the binder spine. Sequence, he repeated. We control the order because we can't control the noise. I slept at home in shifts and woke to my own breath. The house leaned against me the way a friend does when you're too tired to stand. I walked the hallway and read the pantry marks, our heights, our years' pencil lines that never needed a camera. I whispered to my father, even though I didn't need to. People die, but their sentences don't. 2 days before the hearing, Ava laid 3 items on her desk, the sealed copy of Exhibit L, a clerk's envelope for in-camera review, and a small brass key. For the court reporter's lockbox, she said, if we need it. She looked at me like she looks at a map. We might not even open this. I know. What wins this isn't the shout, she said. It's the fact that sits down and refuses to move. We rehearsed. We rehearsed how to sit. We rehearsed how not to wince. Reed played Benton oily and amused. Ava played Ava sharp. Marta read numbers into silence. Moritz clicked his pen in time with our breathing. When I spoke, I used sentences the Army taught me, short, exact, defensible. The night before the hearing, I drove to the marina and stood at the slip where Father used to tie the skiff with 2 half hitches and a bitter end. The rope held even when slick with rain. I watched the bay pretend to be still. A heron lifted and vanished into the dark. I went home. I ironed the navy dress that fits like armor. I placed the tan folder in my bag as if it weighed nothing and everything. I turned off the porch light and for once didn't watch it die. I trusted the dark to keep the honest things until morning called them by their names. Morning made everything sharper. The varnish on the council tables, the threads in the state flag, the light off the brass rail like a blade. The courtroom was full, but hushed a church where faith had been replaced by procedure. I took my seat in the navy dress that fit like resolve. Ava set a legal pad in front of me and wrote one word at the top, sequence. Benton Hale opened like a parade MC. He rose with an elastic smile and turned to address not the judge but the room. "This is at bottom a simple case," he said. "We have dates that do not reconcile records that do not exist, and a family concerned with fairness." He clicked a remote. A screen rolled down with a whisper. A timeline appeared, clean, confident lines, circles in a blue that made you trust the wrong things. "Exhibit D1, he announced, as if the alphabet owed him its first letter. "Our expert will testify that Colonel Hart's claimed deployment between January and June overlaps a stateside evaluation." He said stateside, like safe. The expert in a gray suit nodded without meeting my eyes. Ava didn't object. She underlined sequence once. Benton walked the jury, that wasn't a bench trial, no 12 to play, to through doctored photocopies and concerns delivered like compliments. He took his time with a letter bearing my Battalion S1's name. He let it gleam. "We submit." Benton concluded that the colonel has constructed a narrative compelling, yes, but inconsistent with the record. He folded his hands and sat the screen behind him, freezing his timeline in a posture of certainty. Judge Holloway adjusted her glasses. "Ms. Klein!" Ava rose small and still. When she speaks softly, men lean in so they won't miss the blow. "We stipulate to the following," she said, "that records can be misfiled, that copies can be unclear, that grief makes families say foolish things." She looked toward Caleb without looking at him. "We do not stipulate to forgery." She began where the Army taught me to begin: identity and orders. "Exhibit A," she said. The clerk took the binder and the court reporter logged the tab. DD 214 certified. Deployment orders authenticated. Award citations notarized copies with originals present in counsel's lockbox. Colonel Reed stood long enough to identify the acronyms and sit again. Ava did not look at the screen. She let paper do what paper does when it's true. "Exhibit B," she continued. "Performance evaluations, including the disputed period. Note the electronic signature block field. Signed O'Conis with a delayed backload after redeployment." She handed up the metadata printout. The gray-suited expert shifted in his chair and took an interest in his cuticles. "Exhibit C," Ava said. "Hospice log." She did not change her tone. "Notary journal, Ms. Shelley Tran." She placed the photocopied pages on the rail date, time, thumbprint, driver's license numbers of two witnesses whose names I knew from church bulletins. "Your Honor will observe consistency with prior signatures by Mr. Hart in Miss Tran's book." Benton rose. "Objection. Hearsay within hearsay." "Overruled," Judge Holloway said. "This goes to execution of a codicil." Ava nodded, unbothered. "Exhibit D," she said. "Financial flows. Connected to the Veterans Initiative," Mr. Hale mentioned with such civic spirit. Marta leaned forward as if releasing a dove. On the screen, Ava's only nod to performance appeared: a map of boxes and lines, mailbox LLCs, donor-advised funds, transfers in round numbers, stepping like footprints to an account labeled Household Contingency R. Hart. "We will call Ms. Singh to testify as to the origin and destination of funds," Ava said. "For now, note sequence. Funds are solicited using my client's rank and image. Funds are moved. Amounts become vague. Vendors are connected to a mailbox, not a storefront. The story is fuzzy. The math is clear." Benton tried charm. "Charity is messy," he said, palms up. "Accounting is not," Ava returned. "Neither is the law." I kept my eyes forward. I heard Ruth inhale through her teeth, the tiny squeak of a pearl strand sliding under a finger. Caleb's knee jittered under the table. 6 beats, pause, 6 beats again. Jonah sat behind them with his hands folded and his gaze lowered, as if prayer might be built from keeping your head down at the right times. Ava turned one last tab. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, we request an in-camera review of one additional page sealed as Exhibit L." She placed a clerk's envelope on the rail. "It is the last page of Mr. Hart's personal ledger." Benton stood too fast. "More theatrics, Judge. We've all seen." "Mr. Hale," Judge Holloway said without looking up, "sit." The envelope opened with the sticky sound of a bandage peeled from skin. Paper slid across oak. The judge read. In the gallery, even the radiator seemed to lower its voice. Ava did not fill the quiet. She let it be oxygen. I watched the judge's eyes, not her mouth. First the scan, then the stop, then the second pass, slower, as if this time the words might choose to be different, and refused. The jaw muscles along her cheekbones fired in sequence. She lifted a hand without lifting her gaze. The bailiff stepped closer, practiced and careful. I could feel the heat under my palms, where they rested on the table. The oak held steady. The air conditioner whispered like surf. Above us, the state seal watched without blinking. Somewhere in the last row, a chair creaked and went still. Judge Holloway set the page down and met my lawyer's eyes. When she spoke, she did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. This is criminal! Lock it down! Metal touched metal, the slide of the deadbolt. The click that meant the hallway wasn't an option. A ripple moved through the room, a human sound that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite relief, the noise of people remembering where they are. The clerk produced plastic sleeves. The judge handed the page over herself, 2 fingers on the top edge, no smudges. On the record, she said the court notes potential forgery of a testamentary instrument misuse of veteran status for financial gain and possible diversion of charitable funds. Phones down. No one leaves. Benton started a sentence and abandoned it. The gray-suited expert stared at his lap. Caleb did something he almost never does. He looked at me instead of a room. There was a heartbeat where I could see him as a boy in a church suit, his cowlick refusing to behave, his mouth full of a promise he had not yet learned how to break. Then his lips pressed into their practiced line. Ruth's knuckles went white against the pearls. Jonah's fingers tightened into his knee. He lifted his head and let his eyes meet mine just once, as if to confirm that the thing he had done under sodium lights and Halyard's song had landed where it needed to. Marshal service is en route, the bailiff announced quietly. Ava wrote one more word on the legal pad, breathe. I did. In 4. Hold 4. Out 4. Hold 4. It steadied the small tremor working through my left hand. It softened the place in my chest that had been coiled since the envelope first hit my kitchen table. Ms. Klein, the judge said you and Mr. Hale will approach. The rest will remain seated. Ava gathered nothing. She did not shuffle papers to appear busy. She moved the way tide moves, purpose disguised as patience. As she walked, I let my focus widen. The wood grain, the scuff at the baseboard that said a janitor once hit the same spot often, the smell of lemon cleaner and starch and human worry. The everythingness of an ordinary room on a day that wasn't ordinary at all. Papers slid in sleeves. The clerk wrote times down. The reporter caught every syllable with small, hungry strokes. I thought of my father's pencil, the way fatigue made his loops larger toward the end. Not messy, just generous, as if he'd decided to give more space to each letter before he ran out of line. Ava reached the bench and looked back at me, long enough for a half nod. Not a victory, a checkpoint. I nodded back once. I was not gloating. I was not even glad. I was something steadier, not untouched, but whole. The judge reconvened us with a voice like a steady bridge over fast water. On the civil causes, she said the court grants the defendant's motion. Claims are dismissed with prejudice. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. The bequest of the Bay property stands as written and as amended. Then, this matter is referred to the Commonwealth's attorney, and if applicable, federal authorities for investigation into potential forgery, fraud, and misuse of charitable funds. Ava's pen did not move. She didn't need notes to remember sentences you carry for a lifetime. Benton's face lost its gloss. He pressed his lips into the line men use when they want a different pair of lips to blame. Caleb sat too straight and too still, a posture he'd learned from mirrors. Ruth's hand searched her pearls and found only skin. The bailiff opened the doors. An ordinary sound made momentous. Voices rose like steam. A reporter called my name and was hushed by a second reporter who valued access over noise. Jonah did not look at me on his way out. He looked at the floor the way you do when the world has changed and you're trying to keep your feet where they belong. Outside, winter sun hit the courthouse steps and turned every breath into a small ghost. Ava kept one hand at her side and one on the strap of her bag. "We'll avoid the crowd," she said. Back exit. One statement, then home. "What's the statement?" I asked. "The law worked today," she said. "That's all. Don't decorate it." We used a service hallway that smelled like floor wax and old paper. On the loading dock, a trash truck beeped in reverse, while a man in a green vest smoked a cigarette and pretended he hadn't seen 10 lives bend around a single piece of paper. I breathed on fours. My shoulders loosened in the way a knot loosens when the right hand knows where to pull. Ava faced the two microphones a junior reporter had hustled around back. "No further comment," she said, calm as the tide. "The court's orders speak for themselves." When a young man tried to ask if I had anything to say to people who feel misled, she stepped half a pace forward and shook her head. The young man lowered his eyes as if he had broken a rule at church. I drove the long road home with the radio off. When you've been in noise long enough, silence is not absence. It's medicine. The marsh sewed itself to the horizon with a thread of thin water. A blue heron lifted, writ the letter of a new day in the air, and settled out of view. The tan folder lay flat on the passenger seat, inert as any ordinary object. It had not saved me. It had simply stopped a lie from finishing its work. Herrenhaus took me in with the same small sigh it gives every time the front door opens. Wood noticing wait. I hung my coat. I filled the kettle. The kitchen window held a rectangle of bay like a picture I could walk into. Sun on ripples. A skiff cutting a thin scar that closed itself behind the prop. I set the folder on the table and opened Father's ledger to the last page. Pencil gray strokes fat from fatigue, a date 2 names that had no reason to meet inside a decent sentence, and the margin note where his hand had pressed hard enough to ghost through. Seeing it again didn't make it less or more. It made it true in a way that had nothing to do with courtrooms and everything to do with a man finishing a thing the right way. Jonah knocked just after 3. He didn't wait for me to say, "Come in." He held his hat in both hands, like it contained instructions. I poured him coffee without asking, and he took it black because his hands were already full. "You all right?" I asked. He nodded and then shook his head. "Both," he said. "That's the right answer." He sat at the table and looked at the ledger the way you look at a photograph of someone who has left you a job to do. "He knew," Jonah said. He knew, I said, and he wrote it down. I thought, Mom, would he stopped and pressed his thumb into the hat brim, not to punish it, but to hold something steady. I thought she would see it when someone else said it out loud. "Some people don't believe the weather until they're wet," I said not unkindly. "She believes the story she needs to live with herself. So does Caleb." "I don't know what I believe about myself," Jonah said. He lifted his eyes, and for a second, I saw the boy who used to follow me around the yard, looking for a safe shadow. I waited too long. "You waited as long as you did," I said. "You came when it mattered. That's the math." He nodded. "I'm sorry." "I know," I said. "Me too." We went out to the porch with our mugs. The boards had a little give from last week's rain. The rail was warm where the sun sat. A pair of ospreys talked to each other like old men, gossiping about boats that aren't theirs anymore. Across the water, the bell buoy counted slow time for people with nothing urgent left to prove. "What will happen to them?" Jonah asked. "Whatever the law measures," I said. "Whatever the math says. I don't have to watch." "You're not angry." I didn't answer for a while. Anger is easy. It's also heavy. "I'm tired," I said. "And I'm done carrying what doesn't get me home." He nodded, and we sat with the wind until our coffee went cool and the sun slipped past the roofline and the porch pulled its shade up over us like a blanket. That night, I walked the property line with a flashlight the way my father used to, not because I expected trouble, but because showing up is a habit worth keeping. The beam found the gate latch and the place where the fence sags and the spot the raccoons use as a suggestion rather than a rule. The air smelled like pine sap and tide. A fox crossed the back lot and didn't break stride when it saw me. Things that live close to people get good at knowing which of us is the kind that leaves the world better than we found it. Inside, I set 3 photos on the mantle, father on the skiff in a cheap hat with his mouth open to a joke, me in uniform, younger and harder of face with edges, and the 3 of us kids in church clothes, my hand already on Jonah's shoulder, Caleb already turned slightly toward the side with the camera. The pictures didn't argue. They held their truths without asking to be admired. Sleep came like a good order, simple, clear, obeyed. I dreamt the ordinary dream sound of rope through a cleat, a pencil tapping a ledger margin, the quiet, satisfied creak of a house that has decided to outlast you. In the weeks that followed, the town did what towns do. The loudest voices found other stories to chew. A few people knocked on my door with pies and apologies that were not exactly apologies. I fed them coffee and let them talk. You don't win anything by leaving a person with no way back to their better self. The veterans group sent a letter clarifying their earlier request. The foundation put my talk back on its website and pretended it had only ever been under review. I filed both under noise and moved on. Ava called twice with updates I didn't repeat to anyone. "We won't speculate," she said. "We'll read what's filed when it's filed." Marta mailed me a print of her transaction map, as if it were art. I put it in a drawer because in its way, it was. Colonel Reed sent a note in block letters, "Proud of you. Proud of the process." I tacked it inside the pantry door so I could see it when I reached for flour. On a Saturday, I planted roses along the south fence, bare root, ugly as hope. Dirt under nails is a prayer none of the hymnals teach. I watered them and told them stories about wind and staying and what light does to a stubborn thing. When the first leaves came, they were small and immodest. That's how beginnings work. They don't arrive with trumpets. They arrive with chlorophyll and quiet. If you're listening to this, and your life feels like a room that someone else has turned the lights off and hear me, you don't have to shout to be heard. You have to document to breathe, to keep what is worth keeping, and to let the rest go heavy as it is. Tell the truth to people who sign their names under what they say. Stand your ground without becoming a wall. And when the door opens, don't sprint. Walk out like you belong here because you do. If this story sat with you in a way you can't quite name, share it with someone who needs the sound of steady more than the sound of victory. If you want more stories told without fireworks, but with spine, subscribe and come sit on this porch with me again. Bring your coffee. Bring your breath. Bring the thing you've decided to keep no matter the cost. The porch light will be on.